Good morning, everyone, or good evening, everyone, as the case may be. Good to see so many attendees here this morning for the next instalment of Newfound Market Mission. And I've got to say before we get started today, what a great session we had yesterday morning, or last night, as the case may be. We had some genuine experts giving some real insights into how you can commercially engage and what to look for in the Australian marketplace. So I hope you got as much out of it as I did. I've been doing this for 30 years and I just thought that was one of the best sessions I've had commercially in a conference in a long time. And I hope you really got some great value out and some great questions there as well. The engagement has been fantastic. It's been lifting throughout this series and I want to encourage you to keep doing that tonight because we've got some very important and quite technical sessions tonight as well. So what we're doing tonight is we're going to be talking about developing your approach. And that's obviously very important. That's one of the points of this whole market mission. And to help us do that and really talk about the research component of that, I'm going to invite you to, I'm going to welcome Ulrich Loeffler, who's the CEO of Ecosystem here in Australia. His role as Chief Commercial Officer is responsible for developing new business models around Ecosystem's research platform. He's tasked to expand Ecosystem's research syndicate of independent analysts and to drive the market activities for the business. And so you are potentially clients of his. He's got a huge level of expertise, like all of our speakers have. He's going to be speaking for about 45 minutes or so, plus we've got questions. But Uli has let me know that he's encouraging questions throughout his session. So we really want it to become a conversation. And then after that, we've got a panel discussion of again, some real heavyweights of the fintech sector here in Australia. I genuinely can say that. I've met some of them personally, know some of them personally. They're real heavyweights. So Uli, welcome on board. Great to see you. Great to see that great background there. It's nice and colourful and lively. Spring has sprung here in Australia.
I know. Thanks, Andrew. thanks for having me and thanks for the lovely introduction. First of all, good morning everyone as well, or good evening. I saw that there's quite a broad range of different time zones included in this call. I've got to apologize first of all for this background. It's actually not a virtual one. It's actually our wallpaper in our office. So
I love it.
Yeah, so it's better
than mine. Look at mine.
It's always spring in our office here. Look, I heard good sessions yesterday, which is great to hear, and I guess there were quite a few engagements over the last week as well. Hopefully we can continue that momentum. When you mentioned that yesterday was about commercial engagements in the Australia market, obviously commercial engagements are always exciting. So what I would try to do today is bridge the topic to research and also how research can potentially help in these commercial engagements as well. So hopefully we can bridge this successfully.
Just a tip for our participants, use the Q&A function to ask those questions. And as I said before, Uli's happy to take questions throughout the session. I'll be moderating those, so fire away your questions when Uli gets started and you do his presentation. Over to you, Uli.
Perfect. Look, I might just quickly share my screen and see how that works. While doing this, I just want to thank obviously Newfound and best case scenario BCS as well for having me or inviting me for this session. So as Andrew mentioned, so I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Ecosystem. So I thought before we can just quickly check, you've got my full screen probably in this picture.
Yeah.
Should work. Great. Thanks, Luli. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on how some of the engagements that we have been having with companies like yourselves, growth companies, specifically in the fintech market. But I also want to give you a little bit of context where we are coming from an ecosystem, but also myself, as a Chief Operating Officer. So a little bit intro to myself. As you can probably guess from the name and the accent, I'm originally from Germany. I was born and bred in Hamburg, Germany, and then in 2003 packed my bags to go as far away from Germany as possible. So I landed up in New Zealand on a working holiday visa. Thought I would stay for about 6 months to 12 months, which ended up to be a 12-year stint, including taking on citizenship in New Zealand. And I know we've got some Kiwi companies on the on the call as well. So Kira, nice to have you. So I spent a little bit more time than originally planned, and then in 2008, actually 2006, I should have changed this. Moved to IDC, which is one of the leading tech research firms globally. Started in software research, managed the software research across the Tasman, across Australia and New Zealand, always based in New Zealand. And then in 2008, just after the GFC, took on the country manager role, which was great for your first management position. Any downward trend in the business, you could always blame on the GFC. So it gives you a little bit of learning space. So did this for about 6 years, managed the New Zealand team before moving over to Australia to take on the managing director role for the South Pacific region. Then in 2017, I was approached by Ecosystem, which I explained shortly. So I moved to Singapore, to take on the role of Chief Operating Officer. Still working, closely with Australian companies or in Australia. So I came back here beginning of 2020 for a project. Unfortunately, was hit by the border closures in March, and so I've been stranded here for the last 7 months. So we, I've been working from here, but I just actually got my re-entry permit last week, so I'm heading back to Singapore in the beginning of October. Quick intro to Ecosystem as well. So Ecosystem is, we're a private equity backed research firm. After spending about 15 years at IDC, and we've got people from Gartner as well, and people from Forrester, Frost & Sullivan, from pretty much all of the traditional research firms. We felt that there was a little bit of a limitation on applying a very static, very traditional model to tech research. So while a lot of these tech research firms advising a lot on digital transformation and innovation and disruption, what we felt is that the companies themselves haven't really innovated much, which meant that the research was very restrictive, very expensive and not accessible to the larger majority of the market. But also very static, so not really moving, at speed with the, with the change that we're experiencing in the market. So we essentially created this, mission on democratizing research, so making, data available to pretty much everyone in the market, but also providing it in real time and make it very dynamic, very fluid to respond to, to the changes in the, in the market landscape. We are headquartered in Singapore. We're private equity backed as well, I should say. But we've got, we're Kiwi owned, so our ownership and our founder is Kiwi as well. So we are majority Kiwi owned, but headquartered in Singapore, with presence at the moment pretty much all across Asia Pacific, South Pacific, Europe, and sporadic, presence in the US. That was our big bet for 2020, but due to COVID, also we had to postpone a more aggressive push into that market. Just a quick reference or relevance as well to the fintech sector. Some of the projects that we've been involved in. So first of all, we are being based in Singapore. The Monetary Authority of Singapore is one of our clients. So we are the official thought leadership partner for the Singapore Fintech Festival, which is the largest fintech festival in the world. Obviously last year or this year would be a little bit different. It's happening in December as a plan at the moment, as a physical event in Singapore and then a virtual event for the international audience. But if you in the future have an opportunity to attend or to take part in the Singapore Fintech Festival, can highly recommend it. I think they had about 70,000 people there last year. So it's a pretty strong festival of fintech and business innovation. Another interesting project, which I might explain a little bit as well, is Apex. For your reference, Apex is the API exchange, which is an initiative driven by the World Bank and different governments across the region. Essentially, it's a platform that with a mandate to reduce the barriers of commercial engagement between fintech companies and corporate enterprises, whether in the banking sector or other corporate enterprises. So the barrier of engagement that were identified by the different regulators was that there is, first of all, obviously a global market opportunity, which is hard to reach if you're, for example, coming from a country like New Zealand or some other more remote areas. Secondly, the proof of concept is sometimes not as easy to, or is very costly for the startup, engaging with an enterprise. There's a lengthy process as well as a lot of rigor around sharing APIs and other IP. And secondly, the procurement function is for some enterprises is just ridiculously hard to make it hard for for startups to engage. So this is essentially a platform which has built-in sandbox functionality. It has pre-approved kind of procurement functions. So once you're on the platform and an enterprise is on the platform, it's a marketplace to identify opportunities, but it's then also a place where you can meet and share APIs remotely, do a proof of concept, and basically come to a commercial engagement without having to travel around the world 10 times or having to go through 10 months of procurement onboarding and so forth. So it's a non-profit initiative. So if you haven't investigated this, have a Google for Apex. It's a very interesting concept and gets a lot of support across the Asia Pacific region, including Australia and New Zealand. We did a few projects with the New Zealand government. So some of the Kiwi companies on the call probably will remember. We did a little bit of a Asia Pacific market assessment report for a delegation that was sent to the Singapore Fintech Festival last year to make it easier to basically prioritize and get a foot into the Asia opportunity, which is the screenshot here, on the left. And then also the partnership with Newfound and BCS, where we're the research partner for Asia Pacific. So for trade delegations like this one, but also for individual engagements where companies are looking for international expansion and need some independent market validation or research. So just to give you a little bit of background where we're coming from, and I'm happy to explain a little bit more at a later stage. But first of all, going into the research itself, and just googling what research stands for, it's essentially the systematic investigation into a study of materials and sources in order to establish facts and reach new conclusions, which is absolutely right. But I would challenge this a little bit that research is not always there to just find out new things or discover new IP or new knowledge. In a lot of cases, or probably at least half of the engagements that we're having with clients, the engagement in research is probably more a quantitative validation or quantitative measure of demonstrating market differentiation, measuring or proving a competitive advantage for different audiences. So even so, you maybe know already, or you have an intuitive approach towards where you're positioned in the market, or what the opportunity may be in the market, but you can't quite quantify it. That's in a lot of cases where research is used to give you the ammunition to back your messaging and back your support. And I want to give a few examples of this later as well. Just quickly, Andrew, I saw there's a few messages popping up, so please feel free to interrupt as well if there are any questions regarding any of the slides or something, or any of the messages I bring across.
Keep going there.
Okay, perfect. So just maybe quickly in general, and it's not specifically for fintech or for startup community, but in general, when we talk about research or how companies use research, there's probably a repeating cycle of strategic planning, which is essentially the big bets that you're placing. All of you are now at this trade mission to Australia, or virtual trade mission to Australia. So you're obviously considering maybe moving into a new market segment. And these kind of moves usually require some investments, whether it's building up a team, registering a company, building a channel model in that country, potentially acquiring a company to enter the market, or building a brand once you're in a new market segment. So these ones are the kind of big bets, which usually are not day-to-day decisions that you make, but they're usually this is our 3 to 5 year strategy that you want to follow in the periods to come. So those decisions usually need some underlying market validation. So whether it's an investment or an executive team that requires a business case, whether it's an investor community that needs to approve it, or maybe a board of directors that needs to approve it, but usually you want to have some independent validation that your assumptions and your prioritization are correct. So those ones are the kind of projects where we're getting engaged from clients to do business opportunity validations, to do market assessments. Is there a market? How big is the addressable market? What is the competitive landscape? So who would we come up again? If we enter a market, what are the industries or the business segments that we should prioritize, which is very, very critical, being right on the prioritization, because every company, but even more so on a startup or growth company, the resources, the funding that we have is limited, and we are experiencing that ourselves as well. So we've got to make sure that we are having most impact with the investments that we're making, whether it's time, effort, material, or funding. So really identifying the low-hanging fruit or the the immediate opportunity is very, very critical. So that's usually where business case is done, and then it's being put forward and put to the decision makers, and they basically give the green light, or they say, look, it was a great idea, but the business case doesn't stack up. The reason why I guess the independent research validation is so important in this case is that, first of all, as a research house, we've got a very different view on the market. Every company that we work with knows their business a lot better than we do, and we will never know it in the same way, because they're obviously living and breathing it on a daily basis. But when you are in your own business and in your own segment, you have a very specific angle onto the market as well, and you don't have accessibility to information in the same way as an independent party has. So that's why finding an external validation is important, but it's also more credible, because we, or as a research firm, we don't have any conflict of interest, because usually whether a company goes ahead or not with the business case is irrelevant to us. It doesn't really matter whether you want to enter the Australia market and you find like, oh, it's the right decision to make, or it's not. It's not affecting our business. So there's no conflict that we would prioritize the outcome of your decision making. Moving from the phase 1 to the phase 2, then, is obviously once you make your strategic bet, you've got to operationalize that decision. So you need to, all the assessments that you have made with regards to the market opportunity, the competitive landscape, your brand awareness, what should be your pricing strategy, what kind of market share should we actually go after in if we're addressing or if we're contesting an existing market. You've got to plan ahead in very operational decision making, whether it's on a quarterly planning or even weekly, monthly planning. So those ones are the decisions that are not necessarily irreversible, but you still want to get them right, because the wrong pricing might put you into the wrong segment, or it's not achieving the returns or the benefits that you maybe have hoped for. But the fact is, like, if you get something wrong, you can always obviously go back and say, okay, maybe we should adjust the pricing, or maybe we should change our market messaging a little bit to to hit a different segment or a different persona group within the target accounts. Once you've got your kind of strategy operationalized, it's really about execution, and that goes usually into market outreach. Because it comes into the commercialization and lead generation. So kind of very common engagements or projects that we are involved in is account profiling. So once you've got your segment kind of laid out, and you know what you want to go after, you want to make it as easy as possible for your sales team to reach the right audience, to know who to reach out to, but also know what messages to take out, what is top of mind for the respective stakeholders, what is their KPIs, and what how can you make them be successful in their jobs. But it's also about white papers, infographics, or anything brand building, positioning to the market, lead generation, whether it's account-based retargeting, whether it's events or webinars. And that's where we are in Australia and in the region, partnering with BCS, with best case scenario, on the event side, where they're the best in class events marketing firm. We're bringing the research and the independent content, which is a very good combination to position some independent thought leadership sessions to drive executive engagements. Again, just to highlight the value, why to not write a white paper yourself, or why not just build an infographic or set up a webinar or an event yourself. I think it comes down again, like, first of all, if you push something out yourself, it is always seen as biased. It is seen as a marketing pitch or a sales pitch. From an events and webinar side, obviously, well, it has to do with databases. So especially if you're new in the market, you may not have the relevant database to drive the audience that you want. So that's where partnering with with a local events or research firm makes sense to drive traction and audience engagement. And then, so once you're doing activities, you want to obviously measure, whether your investments that you're taking or your activities that you're taking, do they get you where you want to be? So is your brand value improving? Is your pipeline improving? Is your pricing adequate? So that's kind of this ongoing monitoring until you come to the next cycle and start some strategic initiatives again. So this is kind of the usual cycle where companies engage in research. The entry point is obviously very different. Some companies approach us, or we engage as they are in the strategic planning. Other ones approach us and say, hey, look, we've already done our background research, or we already have assessed the market opportunity and placed our bets. Now it's really about operationalizing it or executing it and reaching out to the right audiences. So that's why the entry points are relatively or different for each company. But I would say doing any of these activity without the others is probably high risk. So just going out, for example, starting with the market execution without being really clear on what the segment is that you want to go after, what the messaging is that you want to take to market, what your competitive landscape looks like, is highly risky. That you're wasting a lot of money and potentially efforts, or potentially as well credibility in the market. From a specific startup perspective or growth company perspective, obviously it's slightly different. And as I mentioned, like we're experiencing the same actually as well, because usually the markets that we're going after are slightly different. So if you're a startup and you're challenging the market, you're either challenging an existing market and try to contest a piece of that market, which means you are either offering an existing solution at a cheaper price, you're doing it faster or at better quality, or as an easier to engage model or higher value model. Or the second model is that you're creating a completely new market. So you're addressing a problem statement that is not catered for with the existing players. And in a lot of cases, actually a combination of both, where your solution or your service that you bring to market addresses part of the existing market, but also grows the engagement into a new segment that maybe has not been addressed. And to some degree, the creating a new market or driving a new market is actually a lot more challenging than contesting an existing market. Because you've got to first of all create awareness of the problem statement that is there, and also of the gap that is there in the market. You've got to drive your brand awareness to address that gap, but you also have to drive your credibility to be the right partner to address this gap. And I give you one example from a conversation I had with the chief information officer or chief digital officer of one of the large banks in Singapore. And he said to me, look, one of the biggest challenges that we have with engaging with the fintech community is I can invest $100 million into a project with Oracle or IBM or Microsoft or one of the big companies. And if the project fails and doesn't reach the outcome that I was anticipating, I could probably explain it to my board or to my executive team. If I invest a smaller amount, like $1 million or $2 million, and engage with a startup company, and the project fails, they would probably come back and say, like, look, why did you go with them? Now, why didn't you do your due diligence? And why did you take a risk to engage with an unknown brand? So he said, look, the biggest challenge that we have is engaging with fintechs. And he said, look, we want to engage with fintechs because we know we have to innovate and to drive progress. But the challenge that we have is, how do we know that the companies are mature enough to engage with a corporate? How do we know that they're financially stable enough to still be around in the next 3, 4, 5 years? And how do we know that their processes are right with regards to privacy laws, obviously different banking regulations? So this kind of credibility is specifically relevant for the fintech industry, as for some other industries as well, like healthcare, some other especially highly regulated industries. So you've always got to keep this in mind to create your brand credibility and reference points. So when we engage with startups, and actually we just did one project with a startup who wanted to have they basically developed a product. They launched it in the European market. Now they wanted to take it into Asia, specifically first of all into Australia, New Zealand as well. And they really need to understand, like, what's the what's the addressable market? Is there a business case? Is there a gap in the market for us? What they needed is to get funding, because they said, like, we're operating well. We're kind of break even to low profitability in our European market, so we can grow that as well. But to accelerate and grow internationally, we need to raise more funds. And obviously, to raise more funds, they need to give a reason what the funds are used for. So they needed to provide a business case on why market expansion, and why into Asia, and why into ANZ. So it's a very, very typical kind of project, to give kind of a quantified validation, for some of the expansion plans. The other key challenge is the competitive market positioning, and I give you an example shortly as well for one company. It's actually an Irish company expanding into US market and into Asia as well. So their challenge is they actually want to create a new market, or they are creating a new market, but they're always pigeonholed back into the existing market. So they were really struggling in providing enough competitive differentiation to say, like, well, yes, we are addressing some of these functions of the existing market, but we're also having these kind of additional value adds to offer to our clients. And so they wasted a lot of marketing efforts and marketing funds without actually achieving the results to drill into this, or to dig into this red kind of circle of creating new opportunities or new fundings, and we're still competing with the existing players, which creates a lot of need for, as I said, market education, brand building, and then obviously the lead generation. So I might just go into a little bit more detail into some of the projects, examples that we've engaged in. And this one is this example where a company essentially wanted to, first of all, create a business case for market expansion. So they needed a market opportunity assessment, as well as a market segment analysis. So identifying why this market, and that was more for internal approval as well as for external VCs and investors. But then once they've gone ahead, and that's actually a two-phase approach as well. So we did the market assessment first, provided this as for a business case. Once it was approved, they came back and said, okay, now we really need to go dig a little bit deeper to understand what segment is the most the most relevant to our offering. Who are the competitors who are playing in that space, and then also what is the competitive positioning that we should take to basically have the best shot of winning in competitive bids. So what we essentially did is we created this analysis to prioritize market segments for them. We then created competitive assessments of the top 5 competitors in that market, kind of the traditional SWOT analysis. And then we turned this one into competitive battle cards, because what we wanted to make sure is that they're first of all getting their messaging right if they go out for marketing brand awareness campaigns, but also when they respond to RFP projects, and kind of getting their pitch right, but also to empower their sales teams if they go out and they know we're coming up against competitor X, Y, Z, to know exactly what cards to play, what strengths, weaknesses to potentially highlight, and what messages to put forward to have the best possible outcome to win this competitive bid, and to also enable the team the sales team, which is usually when you do a market expansion as a new team. So it's usually either a newly recruited team, or you might send someone over into a new geography to establish a business there, so they might be new to the market. So the time to value is absolutely critical for the sales team to get traction in the market. Another example on the go-to-market side is maybe taking this one step further. So the problem statement for the client was that they had identified already the market segment that they wanted to go after, but now they had a very, very specific account portfolio that they wanted to target. So they said, look, here are our top 20, 30 accounts that we want to go after. So what they needed is account intelligence to find an easier entry point into the account, but also an easier or faster connection between the sales team and their respective executives once they reach out. So in this case, I put an example. It's actually a true example of a New Zealand company where we basically created, and they're very, very easy to do, and they don't really break the bank, but kind of account profiles where we give a general company overview. So what is this company about? Who are their key clients? Who are their maybe key partners? A little bit of a financial analysis. Obviously, very important company org chart. So who are the the directors as well as the executive team that is included or likely included in the decision making. Then providing a few bios and backgrounds on on the executive teams, as well as the company strategic initiatives and highlights. Some news that were just recently announced. Specifically in this case, I think it was some technology project that they've engaged in their roadmap. And there's a few more. So I just took a few snapshots out of these accounts. But what this essentially enabled the sales team or the executives to first of all refine the messaging again, for any kind of campaigns. But secondly, if an account manager reaches out and for example, Sarah Ellison, the CIO, to know exactly, so first of all, who's the CIO that I should reach out to, but then once I reach out, what should be potentially my kind of elevator pitch, what should be the topics that I should raise in the in the first meeting, and also what are potentially the areas that are of relevance to her to make her successful in to achieve her KPIs. So again, it's purely a project to help the company or the sales team to get faster faster time to value. So it's really less about the research and finding out new IP or new knowledge, but it's really about commercial engagements and mitigating the risk or limiting the waste of efforts in reaching a successful outcome. And then the third example, which is more of an integrated one, which I wanted to share. So this one is actually the Irish company, who's expanding into the US market and the Asia market. So their problem statement, as I mentioned, was that they've got a solution which is already commercialized, so it's quite successful, but because it addresses part of an existing market and part of a new market, they're easily getting pigeonholed back again into into the traditional market. And they actually spent initially quite a bit of money with Gartner because they Magic Quadrant obviously is a very high profile marketing or product or tool to take out to get credibility in the market. But the challenge with companies like Gartner or IDC or Forrester is that they have hundreds of pages of definitions and taxonomies on how markets are defined, and changing these taxonomies is really, really hard because can you imagine, like, if there's an existing Magic Quadrant and you suddenly change the methodology, all of the companies that were featured in previous Magic Quadrants will jump in circles to complain about it because suddenly they drop out or their position changes. So that's why these tools are usually very static and are very hard to change. So what they found is that even so they're offering something different, they are grouped into an existing segment which doesn't quite represent the value proposition that they were or wanted to take to market. So what we essentially said is, like, okay, let's create our own market. So we did a workshop first of all with the executive team, where we really drilled into their competitive positioning, their service offerings, their true differentiation of problems that they're addressing and how they're addressing them. And we're basically just listing them out. And then as the next step, we created a research project with the prime objective to quantify these differentiations. So if you're, for example, I'm saying, look, the reason why a certain problem statement is not addressed in the market is because the current solutions are too complex. It's okay. If they're too complex, that means users are obviously struggling with adopting these solutions, or they're not adopting it because it's too complex, or they're finding ways around it. Let's quantify that. How many users are facing these kind of challenges. The other challenges is security issues. Whatever it may be. So we listed it all out and then created a specific study for them, which purely quantifies their differentiation and the problem statement, to then take to market as ammunition to create this new market segment and really drill down on the the problem statement. So we took the findings. We created a thought leadership white paper, which we launched in a media launch event, and got quite a bit of media traction on that one. We took some of the other assets from the study and created some infographics and some other content tools to reach out for above the line marketing, whether it's social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, and so forth, for brand awareness, lead generation, usually to create awareness, to drive traffic to the the actual white paper, which was then gated content to generate leads and a database. Which then through lead nurturing resulted in in a webinar to the actual engagement to drive conversations with these companies. What we also did on the back of that, we created like an analyst-driven influencer program. So what we essentially said is, look, pushing a message once into the market probably is not helping you achieve your goals. Because if you're creating something new and you want to create a new market, it needs reiteration and repeat of the message, which is really hard if you're have to do it via paid advertisements or big marketing campaigns. So we thought, like, we've got so much content and data from this research study, and above and beyond what is maybe put into the white paper, and you can also slice and dice it in different ways as well. So we can use our analysts to use this content and drive conversations in the market, to not promote you as your company or your brand, but to promote the problem statement. So raise awareness that there is shortfall of solutions to address a certain problem statement, or that companies are potentially at risk if they're not addressing a certain issue. So basically just raising awareness that there is a problem, and then the company can come on the on the back of that to basically offer their solution and drive their messaging and hopefully pick up the leads. So very cost effective, very successful campaign, and obviously can be repeated as well then in a following year, or on quarters as well. So which has both components of kind of assessing the market segment, and obviously a lot of this information that we found out was also used for stakeholder engagements, potentially fundraising and other engagement even with partners, technology partners. But then the majority was used on the focus of go-to-market. So I'm just conscious, I think it's 1:15 now, so I just maybe wanted to summarize it, and Luli, invite you as well to chip in, because we've been working in a lot of cases jointly on these opportunities. So to put it into very simple terms, when we look at research framework, and specifically with a focus on go-to-market, it is as a first step, is absolutely critical to know your market and to know your customers. If you don't have that right, then obviously any further activity is very high risk, and is unlikely to create the outcomes that you're anticipating. Once you know your segment and you know your customers, it's really important to get the messaging right. So you want to hit the right messaging to not just address the right companies, but also the personas within these accounts and or within these segments. So that's right to get the messaging defined and laid out. And then once you know who the market is that you want to go after, what the message is that you want to portray, then it's obviously all about target audience engagements, and there's a lot of tools, whether it's events, whether it's account-based marketing campaigns, whether it's obviously paid advertisement campaigns, to generate a lead and drive pipeline and drive engagements. So that's why I said, the entry point can be anywhere, but it's really important to have your homework done in the first two parts. Because a lot of companies that we see as a mistake, they're getting so excited, and then obviously there's a lot of pressure to demonstrate commercial returns, so they're jumping straight into this target audience engagement, and basically running down the wrong rabbit hole, and kind of then it's really hard sometimes to pull back and reassess and adjust the messaging. So that's probably just as a key background to maybe I might leave this slide up. Andrew, I'm not sure if there were any questions, or Luli, if you want to add anything to this.
Yeah, that was great, Ali. So thank you very much for that. And I just want to also express my thanks to Newfound for this excellent market mission. Before Andrew jumps in with all the questions, I don't think I'm to emphasize. I mean, Ali, we'll come back to some of the common mistakes you feel organizations make when they're looking to expand into a new market. But just for the cohort, if you're not aware, and I'm not sure, I hope you are aware, but this is a core offering for Newfound. I mean, the reason that I'm here, the reason that Ali's here, is that we support their go no go solution offering that they for companies that are looking to expand into new markets. So if you're not across that, I'm sure Claire, Marriott, and Liz, please follow up with them afterwards, because I'm sure you'll agree from what Ali's just presented this evening. The insights that that could be gleaned by this process to make sure you don't make some of the mistakes that we talked about in the customer session yesterday would prove invaluable. So I just wanted to make that point before Andrew starts asking questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Lily. Look, we've got just a couple of questions at this stage. I do encourage all of you that are listening to start putting your questions in the Q&A function now. Alan Giles has asked a question. He says it's really good stuff, really good, interesting stuff, particularly the case studies. Can you comment on how many inquiries Ecosystem handled from financial services in Australia and New Zealand compared to the other analyst firms? I like the approach, but I need the big guys to listen, as bigger analyst firms care about the big tech firms. So could you be hitting, you could be hitting a nice differentiation point yourselves. Uli, do you understand that?
Yeah, look, I understand this, and it's probably hard to hard to quantify or put into relation how other companies are doing. And I'd be very open up front. When you talk about research, when you talk about the research, and especially the decision makers, so companies investing in technology solutions, so let's say like a financial institution, a bank, or something. I think Gartner and with some distance Forrester is probably the only ones who are addressing that market. If you look at an IDC or Frost & Sullivan or Global Data or some of these other companies, their focus is really more on the tech vendor segment, to helping them with their strategy and assessment. So that's why I think when you look at tech research, you can really segment it. In the question for specifically for Australia, for the financial sector, I would actually bring in the consulting firms as well. So funnily enough, when we engage in some bigger project where we are working on technology projects or deployments of certain solutions, or this example with the CIO of this one large bank in Singapore, we're probably less coming up against other research firms, but more against the consultancy firms like PwC, Deloitte, or
Reliable.
Yeah, exactly, the likes. Which, to be fair, is they obviously have a vested interest, because they're usually not just doing the knowledge finding, or the as Louis says, go no go, or helping with an assessment of a potential RFP, but also they're usually getting involved in the the implementation or the project design as well. So that's why it's a little bit of a blurred area, to be honest. So when you're saying like how many engagements we're involved in Australia and New Zealand, overall obviously it's limited, because we are a growing market as well. So we've got relationships with all of the major banks. But as you can imagine, these banks are huge. They've got tens to hundreds of projects running at the same time. Considering that we are growing ourselves as well, we obviously have to choose our battles as well. But what I can say is that we are getting some really good traction. So through the engagements that I mentioned for the Singapore FinTech Festival, for the APEX kind of platform, which we're trying to establish bigger in Australia and New Zealand as well. That gives a lot of credibility, and the feedback that we're getting from banks or financial institutions as well is they're all having an appetite to trying something new. Because they're not they're struggling with with engagements at the moment. They don't know how to engage with startups. They don't know how to make decisions as well. I mean, some of the procurement processes are, most of you probably know this one. I mean, honestly, for us as so I give you an example. So we've got about 60 odd clients at the moment across the world, which goes from large corporates to smaller size companies, including governments as well. And one of the biggest hurdles of engagement is usually procurement. Because you're talking to the business stakeholders, you're pitching for a certain solution. They've got their buy-in. Once they pass it on to their procurement or legal team, that's when the trouble starts. So that's where.
So Ali, sorry to cut in, Ali, but I mean that was a big part of the actual discussion yesterday. Procurement came up numerous occasions. So how can a research evidence-based approach help with maybe jumping through some of those hurdles of the procurement challenges?
Yeah, look, I think what because essentially the function of procurement as well as legal is obviously risk mitigation. It's all about risk mitigation. That they want to partner with a supplier that is obviously following the right processes, has the right compliance procedures in place, but also will be around going forward. So from a research point of view, any kind of external validation first of all raises credibility, because it's not just you as a company saying, look, we are doing this, or we've got an opportunity to grow over the next 5 years of 20x. It is validated by an external party. So that in itself is a big value add, and is helping with the process. What we ourselves, maybe giving you from our ecosystem example as well. So we partnered from the beginning, where we said it's like, we want to build the business up from the ground, on the right structure, on the right foundation. So we said that what is really critical is the business case, obviously, which we needed for the investors. So we needed to do our research as well. We said it's absolutely critical to have the right auditing firm, or to have a credible auditing firm, because pretty much every procurement process is asking for your audited financial results for the last 3-5 years. We wanted to have one of the, we didn't go for the top 4, but we went for the number 5, and a legal firm. So we went with one of the largest global tech legal firms, to help us with any of our contracts, T's and C's, and everything to get this ready as well. And that in itself already creates credibility as well, when you've got T's and C's that are designed where they know, look, it's not a homegrown job. Someone has quickly drafted or copies and pasted different T's and C's, or you can pull in the right external stakeholders into a discussion. So that's what we found as well, creates a lot of credibility as well.
Excellent.
Well, but it still takes time.
Yeah, you're right. Uli, a question from me. How would you characterise the Australia-New Zealand market compared to, say, where you've worked in Singapore, where you've got many different countries, many different languages, many different regulatory environments? Is the Australian, and we heard this in parts in earlier sessions, do you find the Australian market relatively easy to navigate because there are, networks and some obvious places to go, and it's all one language?
Yeah, look, coming from the UK, or from English-speaking countries, obviously Australia, New Zealand is is definitely easier to navigate. It's a lot more mature, when you look at the especially the financial sector. I've got to say, when we talk about Asia, I would take Singapore out, because Singapore is very similar, very very mature, obviously very I would say relatively easy to navigate as well. The other thing in Australia, New Zealand, it's quite it's quite a transparent, I wouldn't say transparent, but it's quite a market that you can wrap your arms around. There's not, you're not talking about 20 different banks. There's usually the top 4 or 5 tier 1 banks, and then you've got your second tier banks and unions and the like. So which also means it is a little bit more competitive, because there's more competition, driving into these financial institutions or into these market opportunities. But it's definitely regulated. I think you get a lot of support as well from local governments, from different growth funds that are there, which may not be as easy to access in other geographies. The other thing, what I should mention as well, specifically for Asia, one of the challenges is there is a large, I think Singapore has 145 banks, if I remember right, in Singapore, but a lot of this are regional representations of global banks. So you might reach out to a pretty large bank with a very large presence in Asia, but the decision making might still be in the US or in Europe and some other geographies, which is another challenge to actually navigate around. What potential opportunity has actually the decision rights within your your target country as well, and that's where Australia, New Zealand is. New Zealand obviously a little bit different because most of the banks are owned by Australian banks, but most of the decisions are made in ANZ. Yeah,
and so if you were looking to come to the Australian market, say from the UK, to then use the Australian presence as a launch pad into Asia, what would you be wary of there? Because you've alluded to some of that already. It's not necessarily just that it means that if you're in say Australia, you can then launch into Asia, is it?
Yeah, look, I think when we've seen companies expand from UK or from Europe or any other geography into Asia, including Australia, I would say now into APAC, usually the obvious choices are Australia or Singapore. Because those ones are the kind of mature markets that are mainly English speaking, and where this is a good opportunity as a base. Once you go from there, I would say, which is essentially the ASEAN market, which is a huge. I would leave China out because China is a completely different challenge to tackle.
Whole different discussion.
Yeah, exactly. So, but otherwise it's ASEAN, and everyone knows, one of the fastest growing economies now is Vietnam, and obviously Malaysia, Indonesia. But I have not come across many companies that have successfully penetrated these markets. Because it is, I mean, language-wise, culture-wise, it's different. In a lot of cases, you've got to really be in the country to do business there. Especially in the financial segment. So it's hard to fly in and out from there. But also, you're getting what I found in some of the ASEAN countries a lot more. Because what you want to do is you want to, as important as it is to build a pipeline, it's also very important to basically retire opportunities. You want to validate opportunities very early. So you want to get to a decision where you say, look, is there an opportunity, yes or no? What we found in some of the ASEAN countries, as well as in India sometimes, where the clients kind of, or the potential clients lead you on for a long time, even so there's actually not a real opportunity. So, you're wasting like 6, 10, 12 months into something, and because just they were too polite to maybe just say, hey, look,
I think that came up yesterday as well, didn't it? I think it was Paddy who made the point of raise a PO, get them to raise a PO. Doesn't even matter if it's only for $1. So at least then you know they're committed enough to put you in the system. Yeah, exactly.
You always have this like, oh, you look, your solution sounds great, and you're absolutely interested in that. And once it comes to budget and actually signing anything, and it's let me get some other stakeholders involved. And then you've got decision making is not as streamlined. There's usually like a lot of different executives involved, potentially then different regions again, so which delays the process again. So that's why I would definitely recommend Australia is one that maybe for Asia perspective, definitely Singapore is a good one.
So how active, therefore, Uli, do you get into that validation process? Because it surprised me when you said you're actually often sometimes just making the call. Is that dependent on the engagement you have with the client, and do you just get right in there, and you can honestly say fairly early, look, I'm sorry, there's really just no opportunity here for you. Is that how far you go?
Look, it's so predominantly the engagement that we are involved in is validation of an opportunity in the first place. We are sometimes getting involved in managing an RFP process, and basically helping in this regards. And that's where we definitely can help giving kind of an independent or an objective opinion. I would more say to say, look, I think you're really in for a shot here, or look, I think you're wasting your time. But it's really hard to say, like, if you're entering a market and then you're working on different opportunities, and it's really hard as an outsider, unless you're really involved in the process and take part in the discussions and meetings, presentations. It's really hard to make a sound judgment or recommendations. But I mean, the key one is really I think the challenge is when you're having a remote team, you're expanding, and you're engaging a new sales team in a new era, and they obviously want to show activity. They want to prove to you, look, we're driving the business, we're building something here, and the first place for that is building pipeline. Say, hey, look, we've got another opportunity here, another opportunity there, but I think pressuring them a little bit to say, look, okay. Or monitoring the movements of discussion, how they're progressing, because every meeting that you should have with a prospect should progress the opportunity, a step closer to a sign off. And so we put some measures in place into our own business as well to make a call and say, look, if an opportunity has not closed after 3 months, where it's unlikely to close after 4 months or 5 months, so let's rather retire it and focus on something else rather than chasing a dead horse. And that's where I think Australia is a little bit easier. You can be very direct usually with people. You can really say to your prospects or to your counterparts, look, where are we at? what is the process? What do we have to do? What is the realistic timeline? Are we in agreement that we want to move ahead? If you go to some of the Asia countries, having these open, blunt discussions is a lot harder.
Yeah. In fact, I think here in Australia, it's appreciated more and more. Lily?
Yeah, just Ali, just in the current climate, with your research, with the current climate and COVID, do you find that's had an impact and a change on things like sales cycles and decision-making processes?
Absolutely. Look, especially when COVID hit in Q1 or at the end of Q1, a lot of bigger project or transformational projects have been put on hold because especially in the financial sector. I spoke to some of the large banks here in Australia, and suddenly their biggest problem was, well, how do we keep operations going with people working remotely? Because before Q1, if any employee would have said, look, can I work from home, they would have probably said, what do you mean? We're not working from home, we're a bank. And suddenly their challenge was, well, either you work remotely or you close your operations. So there was really prioritization for for a lot of the large corporates, especially the banks, was put into very, very pragmatic and very functional projects. So that's where some of the initiating something new or challenging the norm was not necessarily the best time to push, unless it was also addressing the challenges that COVID created. Now, over the last, I would say, month to two, we've seen that change a little bit. So we are getting a lot more approached in companies like preparing for next year, preparing for some new projects, preparing for market expansion. So looking at growth again, rather than looking at managing the crisis.
And would you say, Oli, that's off the back of the fact that because they went through this stressed scenario where so many things changed, they really found where their horrible pressure points were very rapidly and realised that at some stage they're going to have to grow, and if they're going to have to grow, they're going to have to fix those pressure points real fast, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. There's no holding back, and you probably heard it in other discussions as well. We essentially squeezed 2 or 3 years of digital transformation into 3 months, and or even less. So there was no excuses what you usually have. Oh, let's delay it. It's too risky, or security is an issue, or something. There was now isn't just black or white. We do it or we close shops. So. That's why they absolutely had to do that, but they also know that this was a reactive mode. It wasn't a proactive on planning growth, and I think any shareholders were willing to accept the COVID message for a certain time. But as you've probably seen with global stock markets and everything, the expectations or the growth anticipation is already ahead of or above pre-COVID levels. Obviously, the shareholders, are expecting the returns, whether you use COVID as an excuse or not. So that's
whether it's reasonable or not.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's a completely different question.
So recognizing that technology was the big enabler through COVID, it's the thing that kept the lights on and kept business operating. Do you think companies now will be less risk adverse, or do you think they're going to go back to, when I say company, I mean corporates and banks, are going to go back to their safe mode of business?
No, look, I think they're more open now. I definitely think, especially in the banking sector. I spoke to as I said, quite a few of the banks here, and sorry, it's just the cleaners coming through here. I hope it's not too noisy in the background. So a few of the banks, and some of the measures that were taken were really unheard of. So before, if someone had said in Q4 2019, we're gonna have these kind of meetings via Zoom, or where our team can in some cases work indefinitely from home. It would have never found any support. So that's why I think the ice is broken, and I think they will be more receptive. I think budgets will still be released carefully, because obviously bottom line is still a pressure point, because top line is for a lot of industries, not growing as quickly as the expectations. So that means, in a lot of cases, expenditure is put under a more rigorous approval process as well. But generally, for the idea and the spark of pushing the norm a little bit, I think the ice is broken. I think that would stick around.
Uli, I've got a question for you, for our particularly our UK participants, and that is that coming to Australia also positions you well to go to the New Zealand banks. And I know you mentioned earlier that most of the New Zealand banks are Australian-owned, which is the case, but they're actually run quite independently in many regards. In fact, quite deliberately, their technology stacks and technology decisions are held very separately. What's some of the advice that you could give those UK fintechs that are thinking that, okay, not only do I want to sell to the Australian banks and financial institutions, but also selling to New Zealand, because there's a real opportunity there, isn't there?
Absolutely. Look, and they definitely run independently, and I figured this out myself when I moved after spending 12 years in New Zealand, moved to Australia and went to the same bank in Australia and said, hey, look, I banked with you for 12 years. I've got my mortgage with you. Can I have a credit card? And it's like, oh, now you've got to prove 3 months of income first. So there's completely different banking systems. There's no, or at least at that time there was no, correlation or interchange between, data. I actually, in some cases, I think that New Zealand is the better opportunity or the easy opportunity, because what we found, not just in the financial sector, but in other segments as well, the Kiwi attitude is a little bit more innovative. This kind of this number 8 wired, how it's used the term there, to basically finding solutions, fixing problems. So that's why we found that in a lot of cases, New Zealand is a great test bed for innovation. The market is more receptive. The approval processes are, usually a lot quicker, because the organizations are a little bit, leaner. So, you're getting to the decision makers quicker than you maybe do in Australia or some of the other markets. So that's why I think this is not a bad strategy to base yourself maybe in Australia, but also, eye out the New Zealand market. The risk that we have seen on that note as well, and I said, like, I've worked across the testament for the last 15, 16 years. One of the big mistakes that companies do is they base themselves in Australia and then see New Zealand as another state, like New South Wales or Victoria. And that approach I've hardly ever seen succeed. So you really have to see it as an independent market, put the resources in as well, because you've got to be on the ground. It's a very personal market. There's 2 degrees of separation. So you want to be in the market. You want to mix and mingle. Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's great. I've done the same myself. Sold to the New Zealand market for nearly 20 years, and it's a fantastic experience. But there's no question they treat you differently when you come from Australia. But at the same, so you need to prove yourself. That's effectively what happens. But getting to the decision makers is easy.
And look, I had one CIO from a large organization in New Zealand tell me once, look, I wouldn't engage with any company that doesn't have a local GM that I can call if something goes wrong. So it doesn't really matter whether you're in an international company and you're entering the New Zealand market, but I at least want to have someone locally that I have on speed dial that I could call up if something goes wrong.
Yeah, I remember there was, and again, had 12 years of running conferences in New Zealand. We could get to the opposition treasurer in New Zealand by ringing them on a Thursday for a meeting the following Tuesday in Wellington, and I couldn't get that in Canberra for love or money. It was that different. And in fact, they came along to our conferences, took notes, and then the second day they'd get up and speak. That was the attitude that we had in New Zealand. It was just fantastic, a vastly different experience. And I'm not saying to everyone out there, look, you have to focus on just selling to New Zealand, but it is a real opportunity for you. If you are based in Australia, it's just 3 hours across the ditch. That's what we call it. And it's just a great experience, and it's great fun as well. So, doing business in New Zealand is fantastic fun. I've never had a bad food or wine experience there yet.
No, absolutely. The other thing is, when you have, because there is this close relationship, even so the decisions on the banking systems run independently across the testament. You having a reference client in New Zealand obviously has a lot of pulls a lot of weight in Australia as well. So that's why, and because you probably have shorter decision time, so quicker potentially commercial success, focusing on that as well, but then, leveraging that for credibility and credentials in Australia might not be a bad strategy.
And many Australian companies, not just banks, but companies, use New Zealand as a test market. So if you already cut your teeth in New Zealand and can show and demonstrate good experience, that's going to carry, as you say, a lot of clout. So, indeed. Yeah. We are nearly at time there, Luli.
Which is great.
Luli, are there any more points you want to highlight before we wrap it up? Are there any more questions from our attendees out there? You have, shoot them through now, because I'm literally going to wrap it up in 30 seconds or less. Willie, any more points you want to raise?
No, I would just say as well, there's probably, I know that there's another session coming up later on, brand building as well. So, if any questions come up later, feel free to reach out as well. I'm not sure if you're sharing the details as well, so more than happy to, follow up on any questions as well. Also happy as well, to obviously leverage networks or something, put someone in touch. We are actually, our founder of Ecosystem, I said, he's a Kiwi as well. We are also, or he's a beachhead for the New Zealand government as well. So for New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. So we are quite frequently engaging with New Zealand companies. We're happy from Australia as well if they're entering the Australia market, just to jump on a call, just give some advice, connecting where possible into different networks. So more than happy to do that for the ANZ region as well.
Excellent. Well, Alan Giles has said he loves your answer and wants to catch up with you when you're next in Singapore. When do you get? When are you able to get back to Singapore?
I'm arriving on the 3rd of October.
Very soon.
If nothing happens with another outbreak or something, then I'm back on.
Fantastic. Great. Well, Luli, it's been fantastic to hear from you. That was a really detailed and well-structured presentation. We expected no less, and you've delivered in spades.
He's an analyst.
He is. What do I expect? Well, thank you so much, Uli.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Luli, and thanks to Newfound again. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of the trade mission. I heard there's a very nice lineup of other sessions to come. So please enjoy, and look forward to being in touch after the sessions.
Excellent. We're going to take a break now, and then in 15 minutes we've got the start of the next session. That's right, Luli. That is right. That is an outstanding session. There's just depth of talent that you're going to be listening to is great. So please stay engaged. Again, ask questions. These panel members have been really wanting to take your questions, so do that. I'll see you in 15 minutes' time for what should be a great session. Thank you.